Welcome to the podcast where mental health is at the core of what we focus on. We strive to develop people like you to maximize who you are and what you've been called to do by sharing tools and resources for better brain health. And now here's your host, Juan Garcia.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode here on your podcast for mental health and peak performance. Mind Yours, where we encourage you to mind your mental health. And the ways we do that is we offer content and resources to help you navigate some of the difficulties that we face and challenges through mindfulness, through thought process, through actually understanding where some of these thoughts are coming from, whether they're irrational in nature or whether they just need to be filtered better through our emotions. And in this series, we are tackling the topic of untangling relationships. And the reason why I believe this topic is so important is because I would surmise that the most important decisions that we will make in this life have to do with relationships. I really believe that the people that we surround ourselves with, the people that we choose to allow to speak into our lives, the people that we pick as mentors, the people that we associate with, ultimately all of those relationships we can leverage either in a good way or in a very unhealthy way. And so it is my focus in this series to untangle some of the issues that we face as we develop some of these relationships, especially when they become toxic. And it's really important to identify some behaviors, some patterns, and some codependency traits that we may encounter in some of these relationships. And so this episode, I want to focus on the term codependency as it relates to relationships, because I believe that a lot of the unhealth, a lot of the toxicity comes from codependency traits, which is connected to dysfunction, especially in our life growing up, in our childhood. Now, if you think about the story of Scott, and Scott is obviously, his name has been changed for privacy and confidentiality, but Scott is a guy that grew up, two brothers, two sisters, in a household where mom and dad both worked. And there was a time where Scott was just feeling down and just could not get his grades where they should have been. Wasn't failing, but wasn't probably doing his best. And dad would come home. Mom would only have a part-time job, so she was home earlier and trying to help Scott get to the bottom of it and try to encourage him to do his work. Dad would come home later in the evening, and the way that dad dealt with Scott's issues or challenges, and this is now in middle school, well, dad would berate him, and dad would talk down to him and call him things like stupid and you get your act together, you're moron, you're dumb, and so forth and so on. Now, many of you listening or watching this episode may be thinking, wow, that's totally wrong or rude or etc. But that's something that was very normal to many of our childhoods. And so bear with me, as maybe your experience was not as rough, but there are things that are similar in nature, meaning maybe other words like you can always do better, which in itself is not negative, but when it's compounded with other pressures, as we'll see in Scott's story, well, it's hard because it just builds upon this sense of being rejected or not good enough. And so Scott struggled because he didn't feel the approval of his dad. And when his dad eventually started beating him because of his lack of effort in dad's mind, then Scott really became resentful, to where he also started to be more inside of himself as far as his emotions. He would not talk, he would not express his feelings, he would not take care of himself physically, and would not dress appropriately, or at least present himself appropriately. And so Scott started getting picked on in school and also got bullied in school and became the target of fights. So he's getting hit at home by his dad. He's getting bullied in school. And when his dad is beating him, his mom leaves their presence, goes into the kitchen and has a glass of wine, something to alleviate a little bit of the stress and the pressures. So in Scott's young mind, he is growing up feeling neglected, abandoned, and that no matter what he would do, it was never good enough. So Scott grew up, became an adult, and was always an overachiever. Almost became a fixer in many ways, a rescuer. And here are some of the tendencies that people like Scott, maybe you, maybe someone you know, struggles in this area. People like this feel responsible for almost everybody and everything, and they also feel guilty much of the time. So you want to fix or you want to rescue people, but then you feel bad about it at the same time. People like Scott still feel they can't measure up, no matter how much they succeed. So there's always this insatiable effort to do better, to do better, to do better, because the value and the worth that they find is in their performance, the things that they do, and not necessarily in who they are. And so this becomes also very unhealthy. They can accurately analyze everyone else's problems, but cannot see their own. Another tendency of codependents that are rescuers is that they often feel they are responsible for making other people happy and successful. That's a lot of pressure and that's a lot of weight. They can't say no to any request without feeling guilty for doing so. And so there are no boundaries in this area. They are extremists. Life is either wonderful or awful. There is no middle ground. They often feel they must be in complete control of their homes and families at all times. This is exhausting. They sometimes give up on life. They become irresponsible and out of control. They try harder and harder, but their increased intensity of commitment often result in more introspection rather than growth. So you're constantly stopping to evaluate, and this does not translate into actually growing and developing, and it creates more compulsion rather than more joy and peace, and more distance in relationships rather than more intimacy. And that's where the walls begin to come up, where the disparities come out in terms of space and vulnerability. And so a lot of these individuals enter toxic relationships without even knowing it, because they bring their own toxicity and they attract toxicity. And so part of what we want to do in these episodes is acknowledge the potential that we may have, or tendency that we may have as codependents, where we're bringing some of this toxicity into relationships. And at the same time, we're attracting it because this is what we know as normal. And this is not normal. This is not okay. This is very dysfunctional in nature. And it creates entanglements. It creates issues in the relationship where there's a lot of webbing going on. And in order for us to stop the toxicity and the dysfunction in the relationship, we have to start to untangle the web that's being woven and look at things for what they are. Look at things for where they're coming from. And one of the ways that we do that here in our practice at Restored Counseling Center is that we provide a temperament assessment so that you are aware of clinically how you're wired, how you show up in life, and the needs that you have based on your wiring, and how you can be sensitive and considerate to the needs of your partner and those that you're in relationship with, and how do we now navigate becoming whole because of the realization that your pursuit and your motivation to do what you do is based on dysfunction, is based on your needs not being met, and therefore you're seeking out those needs to be met in unhealthy ways, like trying to rescue, like trying to problem solve somebody else's life when your life is falling apart. Now, I know it's hard to hear some of these things, but this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to create consciousness, awareness, help you and provide the resources that you need in order for you to develop healthy ways of engaging in relationships where that also translate into mental health, because a lot of these relationships produce anxiety, produce bouts of depression, because we feel frustrated, we can't handle the situation, we're overwhelmed, and therefore it does affect our mental health. And so my prayer is that this information helps at least create some awareness so that we can do something about it and get the help that is needed. So thanks again for tuning in. Hopefully this will be a help to you, and there are more episodes to come, so stay tuned. If you have not subscribed, please do so. Hit the notification bell so that when we drop another episode, you are alerted and you can share it with your family and with your friends. That way, we are all becoming more and more mentally healthy as we mind our minds. Take care, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. For more information, visit our website at juangarciaenterprises.com. Our host, Juan Garcia, is available for speaking, coaching, and one-on-one counseling. You can email us at info@juangarciaenterprises.com. Until next time, remember, we only have one mind, so mind yours.